I never thought a corner store could feel like home, but Harrison's had that odd sort of comfort most people wouldn't expect. I grew up moving from one small town to another, my dad always switching jobs, never staying long enough to make friends, never letting roots take hold. By the time I hit college, I had a weird habit of observing people, how they walked, how they laughed, how they left crumbs of themselves everywhere, and I guess that made me good at retail. I was 19, juggling classes and shifts, sleep-deprived but resilient in a way I didn't even know. Harrison's corner store was supposed to be my break from stress, a quiet place where life moved slowly enough for me to catch my breath. That November night, though, felt off the moment I clocked in. The air smelled like stale coffee mixed with cleaning chemicals, a combination that always made me feel slightly dizzy. The fluorescent lights flickered over the aisles, casting long shadows that twisted in ways my mind didn't want to acknowledge. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was just tired, but my stomach didn't cooperate. Around midnight, after the last customer had left and the bell above the door stopped ringing, I noticed him. A man, hoodie drawn over his head, sitting rigidly at the break table in the corner. He wasn't eating or scrolling on his phone, just staring at the floor. At first I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, maybe a friend meeting him for a late snack. But there was something off, a stillness that made the hair on my arms prick. I stocked chips slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. When I returned to the stockroom near the back to grab some cleaning supplies, my stomach dropped. He was standing in the doorway, not moving his feet, just observing me as though he had been there the entire night without my noticing. My hand shook as I picked up my walkie, calling Denise, my manager. "Denise, there's someone in the back," I whispered, hoping my voice sounded steady. "Are you sure?" she asked calmly over the radio. "Yes, he's right here," I said, my words tumbling over themselves. Within a minute she appeared, and the man looked up. That smile, slow and deliberate, sent a wave of dread through me. "Don't come closer," he said softly but with menace behind it. We moved backward, keeping our eyes on him, slowly inching toward the front door. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. The dispatcher on the line told us help was on the way, and I could hear the sirens in the distance as we stayed put, tense and silent. When the officers arrived, they searched him thoroughly, found nothing, and escorted him off the property. But the fear didn't leave. Even now, weeks later, I could feel the memory of that night creeping into my thoughts every time I passed the store. Harrison's hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. I realized then that fear doesn't always need a reason. It just needs presence. And sometimes the familiar can become strange in a heartbeat. The days after that night were strangely quiet. The store felt heavier somehow, like the fluorescent lights cast shadows longer than usual. My coworkers noticed it too. Denise didn't push me to talk, but her glances told me she understood. I tried to keep the routine, sweeping the floors, stocking shelves, greeting the occasional customer, but every sound, every creak in the building made me flinch. I started noticing small things I hadn't paid attention to before. A loose tile near the cooler that seemed to vibrate if you stepped too close. The way the neon sign outside flickered even in daylight. I couldn't explain why these details suddenly mattered, but they did. One night, while counting cash in the back office, I glanced at the security monitors and froze. I thought I saw a figure at the edge of the parking lot, too still to be a normal person walking by. My pulse quickened, and I called Denise again. "This is probably nothing," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "Maybe," she said over the walkie, her calm tone doing little to soothe me. Nothing happened that night, and yet the unease settled into my chest like a living thing. I realized fear wasn't a one-time event. It could linger, invisible but palpable. I started parking closer to the front doors, checking mirrors before stepping out, gripping my keys like a weapon. I never thought I'd be that person, but I'd learned that fear could make even the smallest precautions feel essential. It was during those long, quiet hours that I started noticing the regulars more closely. The man who came in at 2 a.m. every Friday buying nothing but a pack of gum. The woman who spent half an hour wandering the aisles, glancing behind her constantly. Harrison's had always been a safe place, but now I realized it held the potential for danger lurking in corners I'd previously ignored. I learned to trust my instincts even when they didn't make sense to anyone else. A week later, I was closing alone. The store was unusually empty, the usual hum of the freezer seeming louder in the quiet. I was straightening shelves when I saw him again. Black hoodie, jeans, standing by the soda cooler like he had no reason to be there. My chest tightened. I called 911 immediately, whispering my location. This time, he didn't speak. He just tilted his head, watching me. The dispatcher stayed calm on the line, but I could hear my own breathing over the speaker, fast and shallow. 15 minutes felt like hours. When the police finally arrived, he was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as he had come. After that, the fear never fully left me. I began to understand that some dangers weren't about weapons or violence. They were about presence, about someone occupying the same space and making you feel unsafe simply by existing. Over the next months, I developed routines to protect myself. I left the store in pairs when possible, kept pepper spray in my pocket, and checked every aisle before closing. My coworkers learned to respect my vigilance, and some even admitted they had felt uneasy, but ignored it. Harrison's wasn't just a job anymore. It was a test of alertness, patience, and self-trust. I also started noticing that fear wasn't always loud. It could creep quietly, like a shadow over your shoulder, making mundane tasks feel risky. But I didn't let it win. I learned to act despite the fear, to set boundaries, to speak up when something felt wrong. It was nearly a year later that I finally felt some closure. The man from before had been caught by police in a different incident and was in custody. No one was hurt at Harrison's, but the experience stayed with me. I realized how fragile safety could be, even in places you thought were familiar. I continued to work at Harrison's, still nervous sometimes, still checking corners and mirrors, but now with confidence rather than terror. I had learned the importance of trusting instincts, of setting limits, and of acknowledging fear without letting it control me. Harrison's remained my workplace, but it had also become a classroom, teaching lessons about vigilance, boundaries, and resilience. Even the mundane can hide danger, and even fear can teach you something essential. Trust yourself, protect your space, and never underestimate the quiet power of caution. Fear doesn't always announce itself. It can hide in ordinary places, creeping silently into our lives. The story shows that self-awareness, vigilance, and trust in one's instincts are vital tools to navigate danger. But equally important is the understanding that courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting responsibly despite it. Safety often comes from preparation, mindfulness, and the courage to assert boundaries before harm reaches you. I never thought a corner store could feel like a small sanctuary, but Maplewood Market had always been that for me. It was tucked between a rundown gas station and a laundromat that smelled faintly of detergent and mildew. Most nights, the fluorescent lights hummed over empty aisles and the faint smell of coffee and chips lingered in the air. I liked it because it was predictable, familiar. I could pop in, grab what I needed, and leave without anyone hovering over me. That predictability made the store a safe little bubble in a world that often felt chaotic and rushed. I had been going there for almost 2 years by the time the incident happened. The clerks knew me by name, greeted me politely, but didn't pry. I was a college student who didn't want attention. I just wanted snacks and a moment of quiet before heading home to my small apartment. Life outside the store often felt messy. Classes piled up, papers stacked like miniature towers threatening to collapse, and the city never slept in a way that felt safe after dark. Maplewood was my pause, a small anchor in nights otherwise weighed down by assignments and deadlines. It was raining heavily that Thursday in April 2021. The lot gleamed with wet asphalt reflecting the store's fluorescent lights, and I could see my reflection in puddles as I walked up to the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning chemicals. I nodded to the clerk at the register, someone I'd seen dozens of times before but never really spoken to beyond a polite hi. I wandered the aisles, picking up chips, soda, and instant ramen. Near the back, a man appeared, tall, wearing a red jacket with the Maplewood logo. His hair was neatly combed, and his smile seemed rehearsed, polite to the point of stiffness. "Can I help you find anything?" he asked. I shook my head. "No thanks," I murmured, forcing a smile and moving past him. There was nothing unusual in his words or demeanor, and yet the small tension in my gut told me to be alert. I brushed it off as paranoia and finished my shopping. At the register, I placed my items down and exchanged a casual nod with the clerk, who barely glanced up from scanning other purchases. When I stepped back outside into the drizzle, I felt relief, thinking the store and its familiar rhythm had protected me for the night. That relief evaporated the instant I noticed the man standing a few feet behind me. His red jacket was gone, replaced by a black hoodie and dark sweatpants. The polite, almost friendly aura he had inside the store was gone, replaced by something heavy, deliberate, and predatory. I need a ride," he said quietly, almost too casual for what it implied. My chest tightened immediately. I stepped back, hands up. "Sorry, I can't. I have somewhere to be," I said firmly. He shook his head slowly, leaning closer. "I'm not from here. Just a short ride. It's fine," he insisted, as though my hesitation didn't matter. My mind raced. I had read enough stories to know that this was dangerous, that a person pretending to be helpful could change the entire dynamic of a situation in a heartbeat. I slid into my car as fast as my shaking legs would allow and locked the doors. The man didn't leave. He started moving toward the driver's side, slow, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. I slammed my foot into the brake, then shifted into drive, tires skidding over the wet asphalt as adrenaline surged. The drive home was a blur. Every shadow seemed alive, every pedestrian a potential threat. My heart pounded, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finally pulled into my driveway, locked the doors, and sat for a few seconds just breathing, I realized how close I had come to something I didn't want to imagine. I called Maplewood Market to alert them, but by the time they checked their security footage, he was gone. I wasn't just shaken. I was reminded that danger can come from places you think you know, from faces that seem familiar. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. My dorm room felt suffocating, and every sound outside the window, the rustle of leaves, distant car tires on wet streets, made me jump. I replayed the encounter over and over, dissecting every detail. The red jacket, the black hoodie, the shift in demeanor. It wasn't random. It was intentional. He had been testing boundaries inside the store and then crossing them outside. I decided to go back to Maplewood, rationalizing that it had been months of routine and safety up to that night. Maybe my fear was an overreaction. I parked under the dim lot lights, heart still thumping, and pushed open the door. The familiar smell of chips, coffee, and floor cleaner greeted me, and for a few moments the anxiety eased. But as I walked past the aisles, I noticed the angles and shadows differently. Every dark corner seemed longer, every reflection more pronounced. I realized fear doesn't leave just because the moment has passed. It lingers, reshaping how you see the world. I told the manager what had happened the night before. She was calm, professional, and took notes. "We'll review the footage again," she said, her tone serious but not alarmed. "We'll make sure nothing like that happens again." Her words reassured me, but only a little. I understood now that safety was not about guarantees. It was about awareness, vigilance, and taking your instincts seriously. By midweek, I started making small adjustments. I parked closer to the store doors, locked the car the moment I stepped out, and kept my keys in hand. Every night on my way home, I checked the rearview mirror and scanned the street. These precautions became second nature, a ritual of self-protection that I had never considered before. Even at college, I found myself avoiding shortcuts through poorly lit parking lots. I became more aware of my surroundings in general, noticing things that previously would have gone unseen. A shadow moving too fast, A car idling too long, someone walking too close behind me. I realized that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in, hides behind normalcy, waits for a small opportunity to surface. A few weeks later, I went back to Maplewood late at night to pick up a few energy drinks. I had convinced myself I was overreacting, that the man had been gone for good. But as I reached the back aisle, the hairs on my neck stood up. There he was, black hoodie, hands in pockets, standing perfectly still as if he had never left. My breath caught, and I froze, pretending to be absorbed in the shelves. He noticed me immediately. His eyes locked onto mine, and that predatory calm returned. I slipped my phone from my pocket and texted Denise, the manager, asking her to call 911 if anything happened. My hand shook as I stepped backward, keeping a safe distance. He didn't speak at first. Then he tilted his head and smiled, slow and deliberate. My stomach turned. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly, each word deliberate. "No," I said quickly, forcing a calm I didn't feel. My eyes darted toward the entrance, hoping he would leave or get distracted. He didn't. He just watched. 15 minutes felt like an eternity, and I realized that some fears can't be explained away. They exist in the subtle shifts of someone's body, the way they watch, the way they wait. When the police finally arrived, he was gone, melting into the night like a ghost, leaving behind a palpable tension that lingered long after. After that encounter, I stopped going to Maplewood alone at night. I only went during the day when traffic and customers made the environment safer. I started carrying pepper spray in my pocket and keeping my phone within easy reach at all times. I also spoke to friends about personal safety, learning that these precautions were not paranoia. They were awareness. Working through the aftermath, I realized fear could teach lessons if you let it. It made me hyper-aware, yes, but it also reminded me that trusting my instincts was more important than pretending nothing had happened. Some people walk through life without thinking twice, but for others, awareness is survival. I began to notice the small safety measures around me, checking locks, scanning aisles, paying attention to who was nearby. These actions gave me control, even when fear threatened to overwhelm. Months passed, and eventually the unease began to fade. I continued going to Maplewood Market, always cautious, always alert, but I could function without my pulse hammering every time I entered. The man was never seen again. I never knew his intentions, and perhaps that uncertainty was the scariest part. Life goes on, and so must we. But I carried with me the lessons of that night: vigilance, awareness, and trusting instincts above all else. I also realized something deeper. Fear isn't just a warning, it's a guide. It teaches boundaries, attention, and self-respect. It forces us to act when our gut tells us something is wrong. Maplewood Market remained the same, but I changed. I had learned that safety isn't always about avoiding danger. It's about preparing for it, listening to your inner voice, and acting decisively when the familiar suddenly feels threatening. Danger often hides in the familiar, appearing in small, subtle ways. The story shows that trusting your instincts, staying aware, and taking precautions are essential skills for self-preservation. Fear is not weakness, it is a signal, a guide that, when heeded, empowers us to protect ourselves before harm arrives. Awareness, preparation, and personal boundaries are the real tools of safety in everyday life. I had always been drawn to quiet places. Growing up in Albany, I spent more time observing the world than participating in it. My parents were busy, my friends scattered, and I preferred routine over chaos. When I started college, my afternoons and evenings became a blur of lectures, assignments, and part-time work. That's how I ended up at Willow's Corner Store, a small family-run shop tucked between a laundromat and a strip of quiet houses. I had worked there for almost a year by the summer of 2022. My shifts were mostly evenings after class, stocking shelves, checking out customers, and keeping the store tidy. It was easy, predictable work, and it gave me some independence and a sense of responsibility. I knew the regulars by name and greeted them politely, and the family who owned the store, Mr. and Mrs. Willow, treated me like an extended part of their household. In the day-to-day routine, the world outside felt safer, but I had learned from past experiences that familiarity can sometimes hide danger. That Friday evening, the store felt unusually empty. Usually, even at night, there would be at least a few late shoppers, the sound of carts rolling across the tile, or the low hum of the freezers mixing with conversation at the counter. But that night, the only sound was the constant hum, steady and almost too loud in the silence. It was a quiet that made the aisles feel endless and isolated. I had just finished changing the walkie-talkie channel, announcing myself to the other part-time clerk on the night shift, when I heard it, a low, unsettling chuckle echoing through the store. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Probably someone messing around," I muttered, trying to convince myself. But the sound wasn't casual. It was deliberate, almost taunting, and it slid under my skin like ice water. I took a slow, cautious step toward the front of the store, eyes darting to the corners and shadowed shelves. Nothing moved. The aisle was empty. I muttered under my breath, trying to shake the unease, telling myself I was overreacting. Still, my instincts, refined over months of late-night shifts and long walks home, warned me that something was off. When my shift ended, I left through the back exit, my keys held in hand, ready for anything. That's when I saw it. A dark sedan parked unusually close to my car, facing directly toward it. My stomach sank, and I froze. Every scenario I had imagined in past nightmares suddenly played out in my mind. My heart pounded, my palms damp, and every instinct screamed danger. I walked slowly, keeping my keys ready, eyes on the car. The engine purred as if it were waiting, and then, without warning, the sedan inched forward, cutting off a clear path. My pulse raced. I fumbled with the lock, slamming it shut as if it could create an invisible shield. The car parked next to mine in a way that made any escape complicated, and I realized I had a decision to make. Returning inside felt safer, but the doors were locked. I considered my options carefully, noting that any sudden move could provoke the driver. When I stepped back toward the front exit, the sedan mirrored my movement, creeping along the lot with dimmed headlights. My chest tightened and I ducked behind another vehicle instinctively, the cold night air slicing across my face. I circled to the back, ducking behind a sporting goods display in a neighboring store's lot, and waited. The sedan eventually left, but the image lingered. The sense of presence, the calculated, predatory patience. Even after the police reviewed the parking lot cameras and couldn't identify the driver, the memory stayed with me. That night I learned the uncomfortable truth. Even familiar places can harbor danger, and fear doesn't always disappear when the immediate threat does. The next morning, the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, studying my patterns and testing my reactions. Normally my mornings were slow, my walks to class uneventful, my interactions predictable. But after that night, every sound, shadow, and passerby seemed charged with potential threat. I called Mr. Willow, explaining what had happened. "We'll review the footage again? Make sure the lot's clear," he said in his calm, deliberate tone. His reassurances helped, but only a little. I understood something I hadn't before. Fear isn't always about immediate danger. It's the awareness of vulnerability, the realization that normal, safe routines can suddenly be disrupted. I started taking precautions. I parked under the streetlights closer to the store entrance. My keys were always in hand, and I scanned my surroundings carefully. Every time I left work, I noted the cars parked nearby, the shadows around trees, and the occasional pedestrian. Even walking home felt different. I became alert to the small details, the things I used to ignore. During my shift, I noticed how empty the store really was that night. Usually, late-night patrons brought background noise, muffled conversations, carts clattering across the floor, but the eerie silence made every movement feel amplified. I realized how subtle danger could be. Someone could be present without drawing attention, and yet their presence alone could make you hyper-aware. A week later, I walked past the lot during the day. My steps were cautious, hands instinctively tightening around my backpack straps. It was still the same lot, the same cars, the same quiet street, but I couldn't shake the memory. The empty lot had been filled with tension, a test I hadn't anticipated. I realized that survival isn't just about responding to active threats. It's about recognizing them, even when they're hidden in ordinary moments. A few nights later, I returned for a late shift, determined to regain a sense of normalcy. I moved through the aisles carefully, stocking shelves, scanning the store for any irregularities. Every shadow seemed longer, every reflection in the glass a potential threat. My body was tense, my senses on high alert, but I forced myself to keep moving, reminding myself that vigilance doesn't equal panic. During my break, I checked the lot from the back windows. Nothing appeared unusual, but I stayed alert. It was a test of patience and observation. I realized that fear can be controlling if you let it. Awareness, by contrast, is empowering. It lets you respond without losing control. As the night wore on, I caught glimpses of movement outside. Cars passing slowly, someone walking a few blocks over, but nothing directly threatened me. Still, I kept my keys ready, my pepper spray accessible, and my phone within reach. Each precaution became part of the rhythm, a pattern that kept me calm and ready, without letting fear take over completely. By the end of the shift, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. I had faced the store at night again, without panic, and had navigated the aisles, lot, and exits with caution and awareness. That small victory reminded me that normalcy doesn't always return immediately after a frightening experience. It must be rebuilt consciously. Over the following months, I developed habits that became second nature. I parked in well-lit areas, never approached my car without scanning the lot, and kept my phone and keys in hand at all times. I shared my experiences with friends, encouraging them to stay aware in spaces they considered safe. They understood immediately. Some had similar experiences they had ignored. I also learned the value of trusting instincts. That night at Willow's corner store wasn't about heroism. It was about awareness, assessment, and careful action. Instincts had saved me, and preparation ensured I could act calmly. I realized that fear is a teacher if you let it be. It forces you to evaluate, adapt, and protect yourself. Months passed, and I returned to Willow's with a sense of guarded confidence. The lot looked the same. The fluorescent lights hummed as before, but I carried knowledge, habits, and awareness with me. I knew that danger doesn't always announce itself. It can hide in silence, blend into ordinary routines, and test your instincts. Even when the threat is gone, the lesson remains. Trust yourself, stay aware, and act decisively when your gut signals danger. Familiar places can shift in an instant, and preparedness is the key to preserving both safety and peace of mind. Danger often hides in ordinary, familiar spaces, and it may not announce itself until it is close. The story shows that awareness, preparation, and trusting your instincts are critical tools for personal safety. Fear is not weakness. It is a guide, helping us identify risk, take action, and navigate life carefully. Recognizing subtle threats and establishing precautions empowers individuals to respond calmly and effectively, even when the world feels suddenly unsafe. I've always been a creature of habit. After years of juggling work and personal life, I found comfort in routine, the little rhythms that made the chaos of adulthood manageable. Weekdays were a blur of office work, emails, phone calls, and deadlines. Evenings became my escape, a chance to unwind, grab a bite, or run errands before the world slowed into night. One of my go-to spots was Evergreen Corner Market, a small 24-hour store tucked into a quiet side street in Springfield, Illinois. Its worn exterior, flickering neon sign, and faint aroma of fried snacks inside had become oddly comforting. That early September evening, I had just finished a grueling shift. My shoulders ached, my eyes stung from staring at spreadsheets, and my mind was still buzzing with numbers and deadlines. The plan was simple: swing by Evergreen, pick up a few essentials, and head home to collapse into my couch. The lot was dimly lit, the first streetlights flickering on, and the faint smell of gasoline from the nearby station mixed with the fried food aroma wafting from inside. I parked my car near the corner closest to the store, grabbed a cart, and pushed my way through the automatic doors. Inside, the store hummed with fluorescent lights and the faint rustle of snacks being restocked by an elderly clerk. It was quiet, almost eerily so, which suited me just fine. I wandered the aisles methodically, grabbing a soda, a loaf of bread, and some frozen meals. The familiarity of the shelves, the gentle hum of the freezers, the slight creak of the linoleum floor, it all felt grounding. But I had no idea that tonight, routine would betray me. By the time I reached my car, the sun had slipped just below the horizon, and the lot was bathed in twilight. That's when I noticed him. A man in his 40s, standing unusually close. His hair was greasy, clinging to his forehead, his shirt stained and wrinkled, as if he had wandered aimlessly all day. My initial thought was indifference. He was probably just another late customer. But there was something off in the way he lingered, watching me as I loaded my groceries. "Hi there," he said, voice casual but with a sharp edge. "Long day at work?" I nodded politely, keeping my eyes on the bags in my hands. "Yeah, just finished up. You?" "Just wandering," he replied, stepping closer than was comfortable. "What do you do for work?" I tensed, a subtle alarm ringing through my body. Office stuff," I mumbled, trying to sound unbothered while subtly stepping back. Instead of retreating, he leaned in slightly, sniffing my hair. My heart skipped a beat. I have to go," I stammered, trying to close the distance between me and the car. He smiled, a slow, unnatural curve that made my skin crawl. Then came the question that broke my calm. "Can I see your underwear?" Time slowed. My hands froze, gripping the grocery bags as my mind raced. I slammed the car doors shut and locked them, fumbling for my keys like they were the only lifeline between me and a predator. The man's grin didn't falter. He backed away, just enough to maintain eye contact, and then, to my horror, got into a dark blue Honda and followed me as I drove through the twisting streets, taking multiple turns in a desperate attempt to shake him off. Every shadow, every parked car, every corner became a potential threat. My pulse pounded in my ears. Only when I finally turned into the police station parking lot did he stop, exiting the car and speeding away before officers could confront him. That night, I learned something I hadn't before. Routine can be deceptive, and danger can appear in the most familiar places. The next morning, I woke up feeling raw, my hands still clammy and my chest tight. I replayed the night's events over and over, questioning every decision, every step. I could almost see him, the way he had hovered too close, the unnatural tilt of his smile, the way he seemed to anticipate my movements. I called the police station as soon as the office opened. Detective Carter took my statement, his voice calm and methodical. "We'll check traffic cameras and see if the car matches any registered vehicles," he said. Even as he spoke, I could hear the undertone. This wasn't unusual. People often don't realize how quickly a seemingly benign encounter can escalate. Later that afternoon, the detective called back. The car matched a registered sex offender who had been recently released. My stomach dropped. I couldn't stop imagining the things he might have done to someone else if I hadn't acted quickly. I realized then that fear isn't just emotion, it's a signal, a survival mechanism, and ignoring it can be dangerous. I decided to make some changes immediately. I downloaded a personal safety app, carrying it open on my phone when I walked or drove at night. I began parking in well-lit areas, keeping my keys in my hand, ready for any sudden movement. Even grocery runs during the day now felt different. I watched for patterns, noting suspicious behavior, scanning the lot for cars parked too close, or people lingering without a clear purpose. By the end of the week, the encounter had changed me. I noticed how many people ignored basic vigilance, how many walked through parking lots absorbed in their phones. I realized that preparation isn't paranoia, it's awareness, and awareness can save lives. A few weeks later, I returned to Evergreen Corner Market to pick up a few items during daylight hours, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. I approached the lot cautiously, my car parked under a streetlight, far from the hedges and shadows. The store itself looked exactly the same, but the sense of safety I had taken for granted was gone. Inside, I moved slowly, methodically, keeping my eyes on the entrance and the aisles. Every small noise, the rustle of a bag, the hum of the freezer, the bell above the door, felt amplified. I realized that after a frightening encounter, the world changes, even if subtly. You notice what you ignored before, the small cues that now feel critical. A man lingered near the snack aisle, glancing occasionally at the door. My heart skipped a beat, but I reminded myself, not every stranger is a threat. Still, I moved with intent, keeping a mental map of exits and planned my path to the counter and out again. I was calm, prepared, and aware, and that made the difference. Months passed, but the vigilance became second nature. Parking lots were scanned, exits noted, keys ready in hand. I shared my story with friends, encouraging them to recognize danger and trust their instincts. I learned that fear, when acknowledged and channeled into action, can become empowerment rather than paralysis. I also realized that personal boundaries are non-negotiable. Saying no, creating distance, and seeking help immediately are not overreactions. They are survival tactics. Awareness and preparation, I understood, are the best tools against an unpredictable world. One late evening, I returned to Evergreen once more, determined to reclaim the space psychologically. I moved deliberately, noting shadows, cars, and bystanders. The lot was quiet, the store calm, but I carried knowledge and confidence with me now. The memory of the man in the blue Honda remained, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned to respect fear, recognize danger, and act decisively. Even though danger can appear in familiar places, vigilance, preparation, and trusting your instincts give you the power to navigate life safely. Awareness doesn't make the world more frightening. It makes you stronger, capable, and alive. Even in ordinary, familiar spaces, danger can appear suddenly and without warning. The story demonstrates that awareness, preparation, and trusting your instincts are essential for personal safety. Fear is not weakness. It is a signal that guides decision-making, encourages vigilance, and helps establish boundaries. Acting decisively and respecting your intuition empowers you to protect yourself, even when the world seems deceptively safe. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Madison, Wisconsin, the kind of place where everyone knew each other but no one really talked. My parents worked long hours, my dad as a mail carrier, and my mom at a local diner, so I learned early on to occupy myself. Books, music, and long walks after school became my companions. By the time I reached college, I had a habit of observing people, noticing the little cues others missed. The way someone's hands trembled when nervous, how a casual glance could mean fear or calculation, the subtle ways strangers could reveal themselves without words. College life was a whirlwind of lectures, assignments, and late-night study sessions. I often stayed up past midnight, fueled by coffee and energy drinks, wandering through my small apartment feeling like the world outside had slowed while I sped ahead. To cope, I started finding routines that felt safe, little rituals that anchored me. One of them was stopping at Corner Stop Grocery, a tiny 24-hour convenience store just on the edge of my neighborhood. The store smelled faintly of cleaning products mixed with old popcorn, and the dim fluorescent lights cast long shadows along the aisles. It was predictable, quiet, and allowed me to pause between the chaos of college and the solitude of my apartment. That Thursday night in late October 2020, I parked my car under the yellowing streetlight near the store. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the asphalt slick and shiny. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, taking in the familiar smell and faint hum of the overhead lights. There were only a few customers, an elderly man picking up milk and a teenager in a hoodie browsing candy. I grabbed a soda and some chips and wandered toward the back aisle to stretch my legs after hours of sitting in lectures. That's when I saw him. Leaning against the refrigerated section, a man I hadn't noticed before, tall and broad, with a gray hoodie zipped up and jeans worn thin at the knees. He wasn't looking at the products. He wasn't even looking around. He was staring at the floor, hands stuffed into his pockets, body tense. I told myself to ignore it. He could be waiting for someone. But something about the way he subtly shifted every time I turned made me pause. My gut tightened. I tried to focus on the chips and soda, but the uneasy feeling grew heavier. Every time I glanced toward him, he was subtly closer, like he had read my mind and adjusted. My pulse started to quicken, my fingers curling around the bags I carried. I forced myself to keep moving, to act natural, to make it seem like everything was normal. At the counter, I paid quickly, exchanged a polite nod with the clerk, and stepped out into the cold night. The air stung my cheeks and I tightened my jacket around me. That's when I realized he was following. Not aggressively, not running after me, but walking in the same direction, just a few steps behind. My heart thudded in my chest, and my instincts screamed to act carefully, not to panic. I started walking faster, trying to zigzag subtly, pretending to check my phone. He mirrored my steps perfectly. By the time I reached my street, my pulse was racing and my hands were clammy. I debated running, but I knew that sudden moves could escalate things. When I finally reached my driveway, I slipped inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That night, I learned that familiarity doesn't always equal safety. Even a place you think you know can hide threats, and the shadows can move in ways you can't predict. The next few days were hard. I couldn't shake the image of him, his hoodie, his stillness, the way he followed me without a word. I avoided corner stop grocery, even during the day, opting for other stores farther from home. But the fear lingered. Every walk outside, every trip to campus, I noticed shadows, movements that hadn't bothered me before. My mind replayed that night over and over, breaking down every detail. When I finally went back to the store, I felt like a stranger in my own routine. The fluorescent lights hummed over empty aisles, the faint smell of popcorn and cleaning supplies still there, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I tried to act normal, moving quickly, keeping my head down and focusing only on my purchases. The clerk recognized me, smiled, but didn't press for conversation. I realized then that part of safety was blending in, not drawing attention, not signaling fear even when I felt it. I started carrying pepper spray, even in my backpack, and checking my surroundings constantly. Parking closer to the entrance, glancing at parked cars, noting who lingered on the street. My instincts were sharper and I trusted them more than I had before. I understood that fear could be a guide, a tool to protect yourself if you let it. Even on campus, I became more aware. I walked with purpose, avoided isolated paths, and paid attention to who was around me. The man from that night had changed something inside me. Not just fear, but vigilance. I realized that safety isn't always about avoiding the world. Sometimes it's about preparing for it, being mindful, and taking responsibility for your own protection. One evening, about 2 weeks later, I returned to the store to pick up some late-night snacks for studying. The aisles were empty, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound. I thought I was safe, that perhaps the man had moved on, but as I rounded the corner near the chips aisle, my stomach dropped. There he was, gray hoodie, jeans, leaning casually against the cooler like he had never left. My heart froze. He noticed me immediately, his eyes locking on mine, and that familiar, slow, predatory calm returned. I gripped my phone tightly and pretended to be absorbed in the shelf labels. He didn't move at first, just watched. 15 minutes passed like hours, and I realized the danger wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It existed in presence, in the subtle shifts of a body, in a gaze that made you small without a word. Eventually, I left the store quickly, walking directly to my car. I didn't look back, didn't engage, and I called the police on the way home. They took my statements seriously, but could do little without evidence. I understood then that sometimes the world isn't just unsafe, it's unpredictable. The weeks after that night were a study in caution. I avoided late-night trips entirely, trusted my instincts when something felt off, and noticed details others might miss. A car parked too long, a shadow that moved strangely, a stranger lingering too close. I also learned the importance of speaking up. I warned friends, shared my story, and realized that awareness was contagious, helping others notice what might otherwise go unseen. Even as my fear lessened slightly, I stayed vigilant. Safety wasn't about erasing fear, it was about learning to live with it responsibly. I found empowerment in preparation, in mindfulness, and in trusting myself. Months later, I returned to Corner Stop Grocery during the day. The familiar smells and hums were comforting, but I carried the lessons with me: vigilance, intuition, and boundaries. I never saw the man again, but the memory shaped me. I understood that danger can appear in ordinary places and ordinary faces, that even small signs matter, and that trusting your instincts is critical. Life continues, but you must carry awareness like armor. The world can seem familiar, even safe until it isn't. But preparation, careful observation, and respect for your own instincts can make the difference between vulnerability and survival. Even in familiar and seemingly safe spaces, danger can emerge without warning. The story emphasizes the importance of trusting your instincts, staying aware, and taking precautions. Fear is not weakness, it is a signal, a guide that teaches vigilance, personal boundaries, and the responsibility of self-protection in a world where ordinary moments can quickly turn threatening. I've always been someone who prefers routines. Life can feel chaotic enough without throwing unpredictable strangers into the mix. By October 2019, I had settled into a small rhythm in Chicago. Between night classes at a local community college, a part-time job stocking shelves at a nearby grocery, and keeping the apartment I shared with my roommate from completely falling apart, my world was a delicate balance. Maplewood Mini Mart, tucked into a quiet corner on Kingston Road, had become a small oasis of predictability. The fluorescent lights, the faint hum of the refrigerators, and the familiar layout of snacks, frozen foods, and household essentials gave me a sense of order I didn't always have elsewhere. That Tuesday evening, I walked in after class, dragging my backpack behind me. I had a few errands to run and some snacks in mind, nothing fancy. I greeted the cashier, a woman named Lisa, who knew me well enough to ask, "Back again so soon?" I smiled tiredly and nodded. She returned the gesture and went back to scanning items for the line of customers. As I moved toward the women's apparel section near the back, I felt a prickling unease, like someone was watching me. My head snapped toward the nearest aisle. A man, maybe in his 50s, stood partially hidden by the shelves. Scruffy beard, bowl haircut, clothes that didn't quite match. His eyes were dark and unblinking, fixed on me. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just browsing. But the feeling didn't fade. Every few steps I noticed him subtly moving closer, mirroring my path, lingering near the displays I lingered near. It wasn't just coincidence anymore, it was deliberate. I whispered to Lisa, "That guy keeps following me." She glanced briefly and shrugged. "He's been around before, probably just browsing." Her voice was casual, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I forced myself to act normal, keeping my pace steady while my chest pounded. Every reflection, every aisle corner, every sound felt amplified. When I reached the frozen food section, I froze. There he was again, pressed against the glass of the freezers, staring straight at me. My hands grew sweaty. My heart raced. I grabbed the frozen dinner I had planned to pick up and made a beeline for the counter, trying to appear calm. The transaction felt eternal. Lisa was chatting casually with another customer, oblivious to the tension I felt. I paid quickly, shoved my bags into my backpack, and stepped outside. The street was quiet, the evening chill settling over Kingston Road. And then I saw it, a vehicle parked awkwardly in the middle of the lot, blocking my path. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind, shoving me toward the car. Panic hit like a tidal wave. I screamed, kicked, and clawed at him, refusing to go quietly. He yanked at my purse, dragging me across the sidewalk. The asphalt scraped my palms, and adrenaline coursed through every vein. At the next corner, he threw me free, and the car sped away before I could catch my breath. By the time I gathered my backpack and staggered to my feet, passers-by were calling 911. When the police arrived minutes later, they asked me to recount everything I could remember. The man and his accomplice were caught within hours, thanks to security footage and eyewitness accounts. I was shaken, bruised, and still trembling, but I survived. That evening taught me an unnerving truth. Even small, familiar places could harbor danger, and instincts are often the first, clearest warning that something is wrong. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, calls to insurance companies, and visits to my doctor for minor injuries. My body ached and my mind refused to quiet down. Even mundane tasks, walking to the corner store for milk, or stepping out to the bus stop, felt tense, like someone was constantly lurking just beyond my vision. I started analyzing the details of that night obsessively. How the man's gaze had been steady and unblinking, how he mimicked my movements without drawing attention, and how calm he had seemed despite the chaos he caused. I realized that fear was only part of the story. Instinct and awareness mattered even more. If I had hesitated at any point, the outcome could have been far worse. Lisa called me a few days later. "Are you going to come back?" she asked cautiously. I hesitated, then shook my head over the phone. I wasn't ready. The market, which had once been comforting, now felt threatening. Even familiar spaces could harbor unseen risks, and there was no shame in acknowledging that. I started walking with more purpose, practicing situational awareness wherever I went. Crowded streets, small stores, parking lots. Everywhere, I made a mental map. Exits, positions of employees, and potential blind spots. I carried my phone in my hand, ready to call for help. I noticed the little things, the way a stranger's eyes lingered too long, the subtle shift in posture that signaled aggression, the hesitation in a smile that didn't reach someone's eyes. At night, I replayed the attack in my mind, dissecting every movement, every reaction. It wasn't paranoia. It was education. I learned to trust my gut over social niceties, to act decisively when something felt wrong. Even minor encounters that would have seemed trivial before now had significance. By the end of the week, I decided to return to Maplewood Mini Mart, but cautiously. I went during daylight hours, observed the layout, and noted exits. Lisa greeted me warmly, unaware of my mental rehearsal of every possible threat scenario. I bought a few household items, kept my voice calm, and left without incident. The world felt familiar again, but not naive. Over the next few months, the incident reshaped my perception of public spaces. I started noticing patterns in human behavior, how people navigated crowded aisles, how some lingered with no clear purpose, and how aggression often hid behind casual politeness. These observations didn't make me fearful constantly. They made me aware. I began carrying a small personal alarm in my bag, a whistle, and even pepper spray. I mapped escape routes in places I frequented, practiced opening doors quickly, and noted the positions of security cameras. Awareness became second nature, almost subconscious. I realized the attack wasn't about one man. It was about understanding the invisible rules of personal safety and acting accordingly. Shopping trips were no longer casual errands. Each visit became a calculated exercise in vigilance. I paid attention to other shoppers, noticing who lingered near exits, who seemed distracted or overly focused on me. I learned to maintain confident body language, walked with purpose, kept my shoulders back, and avoided appearing timid. In class, I shared some of my experiences with friends, not to scare them, but to illustrate the importance of trusting instincts. Many of them nodded but didn't fully understand until they encountered situations that made them uncomfortable. I realized that safety was partly education, knowing what to look for, how to react, and the power of acting decisively before a threat escalates. By winter, I felt a quiet confidence. I could navigate stores, streets, and public spaces without panic, always alert but not paralyzed. The trauma of that night remained, but it had transformed into a toolkit, a set of behaviors, mental exercises, and instincts that ensured I could respond if danger returned. The following spring, I faced a test of my preparedness. While shopping alone at a different corner store downtown, a man lingered near the aisles, keeping an unusually close distance. My heart skipped, but I didn't freeze. I positioned myself near the cashier, kept my phone in hand, and spoke in a calm, firm voice when he attempted to approach too closely. "Can you step back, please?" He paused, muttered something, and left. The small victory reinforced everything I had learned. Preparation, awareness, and assertiveness were far more powerful than fear. I realized I could reclaim spaces that once felt threatening by understanding my environment and trusting my instincts. I also started mentoring younger family members about awareness, teaching them to recognize uncomfortable situations and assert boundaries. I shared strategies that were simple but effective. Stay visible, speak firmly, and always be aware of exits. They listened, some skeptically at first, but over time they began practicing these habits. Teaching others amplified my own sense of safety. By the time 2020 rolled around, I had fully integrated the lessons of that night into my daily life. Even when shopping alone, I remained alert without paranoia. I noticed subtle behaviors, prepared for potential risks, and acted decisively when situations escalated. Maplewood Mini Mart, once a terrifying memory, had become a symbol of resilience and preparedness. I understood something crucial. Fear itself wasn't weakness. It was a guide. Awareness turned fear into action. Assertiveness converted vulnerability into protection. Even familiar, seemingly safe places could hide danger. But knowledge, vigilance, and confidence allowed me to navigate life without surrendering to panic. Trust your instincts, recognize warning signs, and act decisively when something feels wrong. Ordinary places can unexpectedly harbor danger, but preparedness and awareness empower us to reclaim safety. Fear can be a teacher if we listen carefully, and vigilance is not paranoia. It's a path to resilience. I still remember the first time Sunrise Market felt both magical and frightening. It was June 2015, a bright Saturday morning, and my mom and I had walked down Briarwood Lane in Minneapolis to the little corner store she frequented. I was 7, tall for my age, curious about everything and easily distracted. The aisles were a wonderland, colorful candy jars lined at my eye level, small toys stacked on low shelves, and the faint smell of fresh bread mixed with packaged snacks. Mom was already lost somewhere between the produce section and the snack aisle, and I wandered a little further than I should have, drawn toward the small toy display near the back. I loved toys, plastic animals, tiny dolls, puzzles I could solve in a few minutes. My fingers hovered over a small model car when I noticed a man approaching. He was in his 40s, wearing a worn windbreaker and a baseball cap that shadowed his eyes. At first he smiled, and I felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. "Hey there," he said softly. "Want to see a special toy? Just back here." My stomach tightened. I didn't know why, but something about his voice and the way he leaned slightly closer made my skin crawl. I called out for Mom, my voice trembling. "Mom!" I shouted. She didn't hear me, still absorbed in her shopping. The man paused, pretending to examine the shelf behind him, but I could feel his eyes on me. I knew I needed to stay alert. A few minutes passed, and he eventually wandered off when he realized I wasn't going to follow him. My small victory made me feel a little braver, but the incident left a lingering unease. I stuck closer to Mom as we walked through the snack aisle, eyeing the entrance and exit. noting the positions of the employees behind the counter. Something in me had shifted. I understood, in a very basic way, that even familiar spaces could suddenly become dangerous. Later, as Mom checked out, I decided to use the restroom at the far corner of the store. I thought I was safe, that the encounter with the man was over. But then, unexpectedly, he appeared behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. His hand covered my mouth and I felt him trying to pull me toward the storage area. Panic exploded inside me, but instinct took over. I bit his hand as hard as I could, twisting and jerking while screaming for my mom. A cashier nearby noticed my cries immediately and rushed over. "Hey, get away from her!" she shouted. The man, startled, loosened his grip and fled. I ran into my mom's arms, shaking, tears streaming down my cheeks. Security footage later confirmed his presence, but he had vanished before the police arrived. That day changed the way I saw small stores, the way I approached strangers, and the way I understood my own intuition. What had seemed ordinary, the aisles, the candy jars, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, suddenly carried a potential for danger. Even at 7, I knew I had experienced something serious, something that would teach me lessons I carried into adulthood. In the weeks that followed, Sunrise Market became a place I avoided whenever possible. I would grip Mom's hand tightly whenever we shopped, scanning every aisle for unfamiliar adults and watching every movement with suspicion. Even ordinary tasks, choosing cereal, picking snacks, felt tense. My imagination filled in the gaps, turning simple shoppers into potential threats. Mom tried to reassure me. "Sweetie, it was just one man. Most people aren't like that," she said gently. But I didn't care about statistics. I cared about survival, about keeping myself safe. My 7-year-old brain had learned a hard truth. Even the most ordinary, familiar places could conceal danger. I began noticing details I'd never considered before. The way people lingered near the corners, the subtle ways some adults watched children more than necessary, the distances between aisles that allowed for sudden approach. My heightened awareness became second nature. At school, I was more cautious about who I spoke to, how I navigated playgrounds, and how I walked home. One day, my teacher noticed my tension and asked what was wrong. I hesitated, unsure how to explain a fear rooted in a single frightening encounter, but eventually I told her the story. She listened carefully, nodded, and said, "It's good that you trusted your instincts. That's how you stay safe." Those words resonated with me. I realized that fear, while uncomfortable, was also a tool. It guided me toward action that could prevent harm. By the summer, I started to understand my reactions better. When we walked past stores, I wasn't just scanning for threats out of paranoia. I was practicing situational awareness. I learned to notice exits, the positions of employees, and how crowded a space was. I began to understand the subtle cues that indicated potential danger: a lingering gaze, unusual gestures, or someone trying to isolate a child. Mom noticed my caution but also encouraged me. "You don't have to be afraid all the time," she said. "Just be smart and aware." Her words became a kind of mantra. I knew I couldn't control the world, but I could control how I responded to it. By the time school started again in the fall, I felt more empowered, even at 7. I could walk confidently, aware of my surroundings, and trust my gut when something felt wrong. The man from Sunrise Market was never caught, but the lessons I learned that day stayed with me. Awareness and action could prevent harm, even if luck didn't always favor you. Years passed, and my understanding of that morning deepened. By middle school, I had internalized the principles of safety, awareness, and assertiveness. When I walked through stores, I carried a mental checklist. Where were the exits? How crowded was the store? Who was paying attention to me and who seemed out of place? I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The lessons from Sunrise Market also extended to my relationships. I became protective of younger children in my family, especially my niece. Shopping trips were never casual. I held her hand firmly, kept her close in aisles, and watched other shoppers with a quiet vigilance. I realized that teaching others how to respect boundaries and recognize danger was part of staying safe myself. One summer, when my niece was 5, we visited a small market downtown. A man approached her, smiling too broadly, asking if she wanted to see something special. My body reacted instantly. I stepped in, placing myself between him and her, and said firmly, "She's with me. Step back." The man hesitated, then left. My niece looked up at me, wide-eyed. "What was that?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Just being careful." That day, I realized that my past fear had transformed into empowerment. My experiences had taught me vigilance, assertiveness, and the importance of trusting instincts. The memory of Sunrise Market wasn't just about trauma, it was a blueprint for resilience. By high school, I had also learned to balance awareness with normalcy. I could enter stores, walk the streets, and interact with strangers without constant panic. The fear was there, yes, but it was measured, informative, and manageable. I had grown capable of recognizing threats, responding appropriately, and protecting both myself and those I cared about. College brought new challenges. Living in Minneapolis independently, I frequently navigated crowded stores, unfamiliar neighborhoods, and public transit. The lessons from Sunrise Market remained essential. I carried a small whistle in my backpack, kept my phone ready, and trusted my gut when situations felt off. One evening, while shopping alone in a local market near my dorm, a man tried to follow me into the narrow aisles. My pulse spiked, but I didn't panic. I positioned myself near the checkout, maintained eye contact, and spoke firmly. "Excuse me, can you move back?" I said, voice steady. He paused, muttered something, and left. The small victory reinforced a critical truth. Preparedness and assertiveness often deterred danger more effectively than fear or avoidance alone. Through college, I shared these lessons with friends, especially younger students. I emphasized awareness, trust in instinct, and the importance of vocalizing concerns. Many dismissed these conversations at first, but over time they acknowledged their value. My experiences became more than personal. They became practical guidance for others navigating urban spaces. Now, as an adult, I take my niece and other young family members shopping regularly. I scan aisles, watch entrances, and subtly teach them to recognize boundaries and trust instincts. I carry the lessons from that morning at Sunrise Market with me, a reminder that ordinary places can unexpectedly become threatening. I also recognize the resilience those experiences instilled. Fear, when acknowledged and managed, becomes empowerment. Awareness turns vulnerability into preparedness. Assertiveness transforms hesitation into safety. I understand that danger is sometimes unavoidable, but how we respond defines the outcome. Trust your instincts, respect your boundaries, and don't underestimate the lessons small moments of fear can teach. Awareness and action are tools, not paranoia. Ordinary places can become unsafe, but knowledge, vigilance, and courage ensure that safety is never entirely out of reach. I've always been someone who prefers routines. Life can feel chaotic enough without throwing unpredictable strangers into the mix. By October 2019, I had settled into a small rhythm in Chicago. Between night classes at a local community college, a part-time job stocking shelves at a nearby grocery, and keeping the apartment I shared with my roommate from completely falling apart, my world was a delicate balance. Maplewood Mini Mart, tucked into a quiet corner on Kingston Road, had become a small oasis of predictability. The fluorescent lights, the faint hum of the refrigerators, and the familiar layout of snacks, frozen foods, and household essentials gave me a sense of order I didn't always have elsewhere. That Tuesday evening, I walked in after class, dragging my backpack behind me. I had a few errands to run and some snacks in mind, nothing fancy. I greeted the cashier, a woman named Lisa, who knew me well enough to ask, "Back again so soon?" I smiled tiredly and nodded. She returned the gesture and went back to scanning items for the line of customers. As I moved toward the women's apparel section near the back, I felt a prickling unease, like someone was watching me. My head snapped toward the nearest aisle. A man, maybe in his 50s, stood partially hidden by the shelves. Scruffy beard, bowl haircut, clothes that didn't quite match. His eyes were dark and unblinking, fixed on me. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just browsing, but the feeling didn't fade. Every few steps I noticed him subtly moving closer, mirroring my path, lingering near the displays I lingered near. It wasn't just coincidence anymore, it was deliberate. I whispered to Lisa, "That guy keeps following me." She glanced briefly and shrugged. "He's been around before, probably just browsing." Her voice was casual, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I forced myself to act normal, keeping my pace steady while my chest pounded. Every reflection, every aisle corner, every sound felt amplified. When I reached the frozen food section, I froze. There he was again, pressed against the glass of the freezers, staring straight at me. My hands grew sweaty. My heart raced. I grabbed the frozen dinner I had planned to pick up and made a beeline for the counter, trying to appear calm. The transaction felt eternal. Lisa was chatting casually with another customer, oblivious to the tension I felt. I paid quickly, shoved my bags into my backpack, and stepped outside. The street was quiet, the evening chill settling over Kingston Road. And then I saw it, a vehicle parked awkwardly in the middle of the lot, blocking my path. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind, shoving me toward the car. Panic hit like a tidal wave. I screamed, kicked, and clawed at him, refusing to go quietly. He yanked at my purse, dragging me across the sidewalk. The asphalt scraped my palms, and adrenaline coursed through every vein. At the next corner, he threw me free, and the car sped away before I could catch my breath. By the time I gathered my backpack and staggered to my feet, passers-by were calling 911. When the police arrived minutes later, they asked me to recount everything I could remember. The man and his accomplice were caught within hours, thanks to security footage and eyewitness accounts. I was shaken, bruised, and still trembling, but I survived. That evening taught me an unnerving truth. Even small, familiar places could harbor danger, and instincts are often the first, clearest warning that something is wrong. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, calls to insurance companies, and visits to my doctor for minor injuries. My body ached and my mind refused to quiet down. Even mundane tasks, walking to the corner store for milk, or stepping out to the bus stop, felt tense, like someone was constantly lurking just beyond my vision. I started analyzing the details of that night obsessively. How the man's gaze had been steady and unblinking, how he mimicked my movements without drawing attention, and how calm he had seemed despite the chaos he caused. I realized that fear was only part of the story. Instinct and awareness mattered even more. If I had hesitated at any point, the outcome could have been far worse. Lisa called me a few days later. "Are you going to come back?" she asked cautiously. I hesitated, then shook my head over the phone. I wasn't ready. The market, which had once been comforting, now felt threatening. Even familiar spaces could harbor unseen risks, and there was no shame in acknowledging that. I started walking with more purpose, practicing situational awareness wherever I went. Crowded streets, small stores, parking lots. Everywhere, I made a mental map. Exits, positions of employees, and potential blind spots. I carried my phone in my hand, ready to call for help. I noticed the little things, the way a stranger's eyes lingered too long, the subtle shift in posture that signaled aggression, the hesitation in a smile that didn't reach someone's eyes. At night, I replayed the attack in my mind, dissecting every movement, every reaction. It wasn't paranoia. It was education. I learned to trust my gut over social niceties, to act decisively when something felt wrong. Even minor encounters that would have seemed trivial before now had significance. By the end of the week, I decided to return to Maplewood Mini Mart, but cautiously. I went during daylight hours, observed the layout, and noted exits. Lisa greeted me warmly, unaware of my mental rehearsal of every possible threat scenario. I bought a few household items, kept my voice calm, and left without incident. The world felt familiar again, but not naive. Over the next few months, the incident reshaped my perception of public spaces. I started noticing patterns in human behavior, how people navigated crowded aisles, how some lingered with no clear purpose, and how aggression often hid behind casual politeness. These observations didn't make me fearful constantly. They made me aware. I began carrying a small personal alarm in my bag, a whistle, and even pepper spray. I mapped escape routes in places I frequented, practiced opening doors quickly, and noted the positions of security cameras. Awareness became second nature, almost subconscious. I realized the attack wasn't about one man. It was about understanding the invisible rules of personal safety and acting accordingly. Shopping trips were no longer casual errands. Each visit became a calculated exercise in vigilance. I paid attention to other shoppers, noticing who lingered near exits, who seemed distracted or overly focused on me. I learned to maintain confident body language, walked with purpose, kept my shoulders back, and avoided appearing timid. In class, I shared some of my experiences with friends, not to scare them, but to illustrate the importance of trusting instincts. Many of them nodded but didn't fully understand until they encountered situations that made them uncomfortable. I realized that safety was partly education, knowing what to look for, how to react, and the power of acting decisively before a threat escalates. By winter, I felt a quiet confidence. I could navigate stores, streets, and public spaces without panic, always alert but not paralyzed. The trauma of that night remained, but it had transformed into a toolkit, a set of behaviors, mental exercises, and instincts that ensured I could respond if danger returned. The following spring, I faced a test of my preparedness. While shopping alone at a different corner store downtown, a man lingered near the aisles, keeping an unusually close distance. My heart skipped, but I didn't freeze. I positioned myself near the cashier, kept my phone in hand, and spoke in a calm, firm voice when he attempted to approach too closely. "Can you step back, please?" He paused, muttered something, and left. The small victory reinforced everything I had learned. Preparation, awareness, and assertiveness were far more powerful than fear. I realized I could reclaim spaces that once felt threatening by understanding my environment and trusting my instincts. I also started mentoring younger family members about awareness, teaching them to recognize uncomfortable situations and assert boundaries. I shared strategies that were simple but effective. Stay visible, speak firmly, and always be aware of exits. They listened, some skeptically at first, but over time they began practicing these habits. Teaching others amplified my own sense of safety. By the time 2020 rolled around, I had fully integrated the lessons of that night into my daily life. Even when shopping alone, I remained alert without paranoia. I noticed subtle behaviors, prepared for potential risks, and acted decisively when situations escalated. Maplewood Mini Mart, once a terrifying memory, had become a symbol of resilience and preparedness. I understood something crucial. Fear itself wasn't weakness. It was a guide. Awareness turned fear into action. Assertiveness converted vulnerability into protection. Even familiar, seemingly safe places could hide danger. But knowledge, vigilance, and confidence allowed me to navigate life without surrendering to panic. Trust your instincts, recognize warning signs, and act decisively when something feels wrong. Ordinary places can unexpectedly harbor danger, but preparedness and awareness empower us to reclaim safety. Fear can be a teacher if we listen carefully, and vigilance is not paranoia. It's a path to resilience.